Hi, I'm Krista West, and I'm the designer of Avlea Folk Embroidery, and this is another FlossTube. Today's FlossTube, I want to talk about one of my all-time favorite topics, which is color in the Mediterranean world, specifically in textiles. So that's what we're going to talk about today. It's a really great topic. Just to kind of remind you of all of my stuff, I am the designer of Avlea Folk Embroidery. If you want kind of the latest news on whatever's happening with Avlea, the best two ways to find that out are to follow me on Instagram. My handle is Krista M. West, or to sign up for the emails at avlea.life. It's www.avlea.life. I really like email. For those of you who are in marketing or business, there's this thing called permission marketing. And basically the principle is that you're honoring people's time and you are asking for their permission to put something in front of them. And I'm really about that. I feel like there's a lot of information in our world today, which can be really awesome, but it can also be really overwhelming. And so I really try hard to make sure that I'm only sending things to people that actually want to receive them. So I use emails a lot for that, because you can choose to click on them or not click on them. And that just basically is me asking for your permission to honor your time. So best way to sign up for me is avlea.life. There's a little box at the bottom that says, sign up for our emails or something. And I don't send out very many. Maybe in a big month, I send out 2 a month. So I try really hard not to do that too often. So and then let's see, you're already seeing me on YouTube, which is awesome. I really appreciate people who have subscribed. That was really great. So let's jump into this amazing topic today. I want to talk about color in Mediterranean textiles because it can be very different. There's some really interesting sort of principles at work here that are really different than kind of how we approach color in the modern world. Now, those of you who want to know a little bit more about this, like really in depth, you can scroll down. It's towards the bottom of my YouTube videos, and there's like a 45-minute long video on color as it pertains to liturgical vestments. And I'm going to hit on some of those same principles because they're at work both in liturgical vestments as well as textiles that would have been used in the home environment in the Mediterranean world. But I'm going to just touch on some of them here. This won't be as lengthy of a video. So kind of to begin the conversation about color, we have to go back to the ancient Roman world, kind of the world of Mesopotamia. And the colors sort of most associated with ancient Rome and that were very prized, in fact, I think is it Pliny the Elder? I think it's him, who talks about these being like the 4 colors, are black, like a gold or yellow. So you see a lot of gold and yellow, red, which would have been something like almost a color that we call terracotta. It wouldn't have been as much of like a bright red. It would have been a little bit duller red because of the dye stuffs that they had accessible. Things like madder dyes and things like that create a little bit more of a rust red, a red with some brown undertones. And like a crew, essentially kind of a tan or a crew. These are very classic Roman colors. And there's kind of a big myth that a lot of people think of the ancient world and they think of the statues as being like all marble. And we kind of like almost put our little 90s minimalist take on this. But scholars know and have known for a while now that most of the marble statues that are in museums and different places around the world now that come from the ancient world were actually highly decorated and painted. And even into Byzantium, I'm trying to think, is it 7th, 8th century, people are writing about how something that is a black and white, like say a sketch or something that's black and white, is not finished. In the ancient mind, something's not finished until it's colored. Which is really interesting because we because of photography, black and white photography, different artistic epochs that have happened and different types of art that has happened over the centuries, we tend to think of something as black and white, a sketch or whatever, as being just as finished as something that is fully colored. But in the ancient world, that was not the case. things were brightly colored. Another color that was very common in the ancient world was blue because of indigo dyes. So blues, all sorts of shades of blue were also used in the ancient world. So this is why you see designs like my design Roman diamond. Okay, this is Roman diamond. This is a really cool piece. The design is really cool. It's got this very unique flag motif with these like interesting, I don't know, almost like a figure eight, but not quite. Very cool. And this design has got a straight up Roman colorway. This is an ecru with gold, with the terracotta red and the black, and then some of the blue. And this is actually, the blue in this is the 924, DMC 924, which is actually labeled as dark green, what is it? Gray, green, very dark, which to me is kind of a misnomer because this is like a really awesome blue. I actually find myself constantly like looking for new blues, and I kind of constantly keep making my way back to that blue because it just tends to blend really well with lots of other colors, and it's got a really nice saturation point. So here's another one that has a very kind of classic Roman ancient sort of feel, Armenian ram's horn. And the ram's horn, actually, that just denotes these little black designs in here. It's from carpets. They're from carpets, and this little like thing that looks like a little ram's horn. This again with the terracotta red and the black and the green, very sort of classic, very ancient Roman. Another one. This is the Anatolian argyle. Again, same kind of colorway. You've got black, cream, gold, and terracotta. And it creates this very warm and I think very rich look. It's a very rich, saturated look. And the colors just really work together. So that's why you tend to see a lot of reds and blacks and golds and things like that moving forward. Those colors tend to work really well, and they were very popular in the ancient world. Now, we're going to move forward a little bit and talk about color in the Byzantine world, because this is where things get really interesting. In the Byzantine world, starting with the reign of Justinian, you have basically it was an edict called hierarchy through clothing. And what it meant was that only certain people of certain classes could wear certain colors. Now, we kind of think like, well, can only certain people wear blue or green or whatever? No, it isn't really that. This was all about controlling access to the dye stuff known as Tyrian purple. Now, this is really important to talk about when we're talking about Mediterranean textiles, because this is the one color for which no one actually knows what they're talking about. Usually when they use the word Tyrian purple, royal purple, porphyria, those names. In the modern age, many of us think that we're referring to the color purple. The color, I'm trying to think of something that's actually purple, but that kind of blue purple color that when we say purple, the color we think of. The color that like in a lighter shade would be lavender, okay? That's not the color they're referring to when they use the word Tyrian purple. It's very confusing in the ancient world. So let's talk a little bit about that. So in the ancient world, on the shores of Tyre and Phoenicia, somebody at some point in history figured out that there were these little sea snails. And if you squish them, they produced a dye stuff that was the most influential dye stuff, you could almost say, in the ancient world, because it was incredibly color fast. Now, with natural dyes in the ancient world, you could dye things a lot of different colors with plants and indigo and madder root and things like that, oak bowls, different things like that. But oftentimes the color would change over the years. It would lighten or it would entirely change to a different color. Like we know historically that there's a lot of greens that have changed to yellow. Some of the unicorn tapestries in the Louvre, they think that actually could have been a completely different colorway and that they've just oxidized to different colors entirely over the centuries. So you have this world in which dye stuffs are not very stable. And along comes Tyrian purple. And it is the most color fast, stable natural dye the world has ever seen. it's considered a marvel. In fact, there's an account of Alexander the Great raiding a city and finding this cache of, I think, like 200 yards of Tyrian purple dyed fabric that was, at that point in time, it was recounted to be over 100 years old, which may or may not be hyperbole. And that was still completely color fast. And they comment on it. They're like, wow, here's a 100-year-old fabric that's still the same color. It was a marvel. It was also phenomenally expensive to produce. It's estimated that 1 pound of Tyrian purple dyed cloth actually cost the US current equivalent of $20,000. So we're talking about a dye stuff that is really only accessible to the emperor and the nobility. But Justinian enforces this idea of hierarchy through clothing, and only certain people can wear the Tyrian purple. So what color was it? This is a great question. And okay, so Tyrian purple is not purple. It's more the color that we call burgundy today. That's kind of the closest color. And it actually came in numerous shades. So it could be something like this is DMC's 815 garnet. Okay, that's the color they call 815 garnet. That's pretty close. You could even go darker and it would still be Tyrian purple. In fact, some accounts say it has an undertone, like kind of almost that it is the color of blood, but yet is light reflective. So it's a very interesting color. And it was very compelling in the ancient world. And interestingly enough, I'll tell you a funny story about this. When I was doing research, I wrote a book on vestments a number of years ago. And I thought color was just going to be this little topic that I nested under the chapter on like fabrics and symbology and things like that. And I had this little, outline, and here was color with a couple of paragraphs. Then I got into researching it and realized there was this entire world of ancient color perception that basically from the dawn of humanity up until Isaac Newton, we had a very, very different way of looking at color. And we had a much more sort of sophisticated, flexible way of categorizing and looking at color that was based in the natural world. So, for example, in the ancient world, color was appreciated not just for its hue, like actually what color it is. Is it teal? Is it coral? Is it green? But it's even thought now that it was more appreciated for its brilliance. How much did it reflect light? So was it matte, like very, very dull and matte, or was it shiny and did it reflect light? And we know that, especially in Byzantium, the quality of light reflection was more highly prized than the quality of just hue. And we don't actually really have that understanding today. And this is because the whole kind of way of categorizing color got really sort of simplified with Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton was writing about musical harmonics, believe it or not. And that's actually how he started talking, like doing his light prism thing. And when you put a light prism and you see a little rainbow through it and all that kind of stuff, that's how we got the kind of modern color rainbow, the Roy G. Biv, the red, orange, yellow, green, indigo, or blue, indigo, purple, violet. That's how we got that. So we've only had that kind of very linear, simplified approach to color for about 400 years on the human stage. And that's really important to keep in mind, because one of the things you'll find that's very interesting is that while Tyrian purple produced that very rich kind of blood red, garnet, burgundy color, successive dye baths, if they put the fabric in the dye bath, they didn't want to waste the dye stuff because it's obviously it's so expensive. So they would dye an initial batch and that would get the fullest color. And then they would dye successive dye baths and each one would turn out a little bit different. And several dye baths in, it produced a color that the Byzantines called hyacinthos, the word that we know as hyacinth. And it produced a very sort of dull gray lavender color. And that was actually seen as an inferior color. So you kind of have to imagine a world in which there are these like colors that are more important and that symbolize things, colors that are less important. So color kind of becomes almost a codex. like a system, a language unto itself. It's very interesting. And so you'll notice that in Byzantine art, in iconography, in mosaic work, this sort of a thing, you almost never see the color that we call purple today, the color that we call purple, because again, they prized Tyrian purple. So it's very interesting. So a number of years ago, I was working on my book and I was writing the color chapter, and I was suddenly realizing, oh, wow, this is a way bigger field than I realized. And I was reading all of these books and scholarly articles on it, and I'm like, oh my word, this is huge. And my little section on color went from being basically a subheading in one chapter to being 35 pages in its own right, because it's such a big, fascinating topic and has so much to bear on Mediterranean textiles. But in the middle of it, I couldn't reconcile. I was writing my book from the comfort of my home in Portland, Oregon, and I had all of my art historical books laid out in front of me, and I'm looking at photos of the mosaics in Ravenna, Italy. Now, mosaics are they're a really important thing to study when you're studying color, because mosaics don't change over time. Like the color of the glass pretty much stays like the same color over centuries, unlike other art forms such as paint or textiles or things like that that can oxidize and change color. So mosaics are sort of considered the gold standard for knowing what a color actually kind of was, or how we would perceive it today. So I'm looking at my book with the mosaics of Ravenna, of San Vitale in Ravenna, which were installed in 586, very early. So we know these are, height of Byzantium, sort of, color, fashion, and everything. And I'm like, wait a second, my book, when I look at these in my book, they look slightly purple, but like what I'm reading is saying that there isn't any purple. So I decided to take a trip to Ravenna, because I just decided that I couldn't publish the book, I couldn't continue until I actually saw those with my own eyes and could see what was going on. So we decided to kind of combine it with our 25th wedding anniversary. So, honey, how about a work vacay, So we go to Italy and we walk into San Vitale, and actually it was one of the most like deeply moving experiences of my life, because it's just an incredible experience to be there in the middle of these mosaics. And they're like 3 stories high, and they're still glittering. They actually underwent a major renovation a few years ago, and then they're just stunning. A friend had warned me, like, you will weep. And this friend of mine was like a person who did not cry. So I was like, okay, really, I'll take that. The grain of salt. I'm standing there and yep, I'm weeping, like, this is amazing. And so I'm looking through all these mosaics. And if you want to know like what I'm talking about, you can Google image mosaics of San Vitale, Vitale, in Ravenna, Italy. There's actually 5 churches in Ravenna, Italy with mosaics, but the ones in San Vitale are the ones that are the most known. And they have the mosaics of the emperor and the empress. And those are the ones that I'm specifically talking about right now. And there's no purple anywhere. And it's funny, I'm standing there, I brought my guidebook with me, and I'm standing there going, my guidebook is showing them as purple, but like I'm standing here looking at them, there's no purple anywhere. And that has to do with modern printing. Modern printing, like in a modern printer, like when you buy printer cartridges, you buy what? You buy cyan, blue, and magenta. And those take the tones that would be this kind of almost rusty burgundy colors, and they make them more slanted towards purple because of those printer cartridges and modern printing. And so that was why my guidebook and my art history reference books showed one thing, where we're producing the color in one way that really made it look like it was purple. But when you see it in person, there's no purple. It's all the mosaics that would be produced in a book as purple are actually the burgundy color, the color that we would call burgundy. So you see this color palette that is very heavily slanted towards burgundies and reds, mixed in with those ancient colors of the golds, the blacks, the blues. Okay, so a really great example of this is the design Macedonian birds. Macedonian birds is terracotta and that tealy blue and a gold. And you get this design. This is straight up historical. On this one, we decided to just maintain the original colorway because it was so compelling. And you get it's interesting. I was just reading in another book on Greek embroidery. the author was marveling, and I marvel all the time at this, that with just a very simplified color palette, you get these amazingly complex designs, and the energy of the colors is very live, very vibrant. It's not like you need 20 different colors to shade things and bring things out. There's this very unique color play that goes on. So you have this Mediterranean world that is influenced from ancient Rome with the black, reds, golds, ecrues, and blues, moving into the Byzantium age where we add on this whole layer of Tyrian purple and this idea that certain colors have a higher hierarchy than other colors. And of course, you also, in the Byzantine age, you have this very rich iconographic tradition. So you have these icons being painted or written, as is sometimes said, with these greens, these like lovely green backgrounds. You can oftentimes see icons done and the background, because there's no like, well, there is landscape and architecture displayed in an icon, but that's kind of a topic for another day, but not the way we're used to seeing it, like in, say, a landscape painting. So you'll sometimes see icons that literally the entire background behind the saint or the individual being portrayed is like entirely green. So you have this idea of this kind of flat background, and we bring in these green tones. But icons, if you've never actually seen any Greek or Russian icons, they are incredible for their coloration. These deep reds, these olivey golds, these very rich blues, lovely, lovely colors. And then even like sometimes some kind of oddball little accent colors thrown in, like a pistachio green or a shell pink or something like that. They're really amazing. So you have this world that is very driven and very influenced by a color-rich artistic experience. Everywhere you're going, it's about color. You go into churches and there's mosaics, like, floor to ceiling. You go to the market, there's all the fruits and vegetables. There's all the textiles laid out. Rugs for sale, pottery, metalwork. Think about a world in which color is very, very, very infused into that world. And so that world of Byzantium, fast forward even farther, because again, we don't have hours and hours to go into this in great depth. But we come up to the fall of Constantinople. Well, and actually, before the fall of Constantinople, we have a lot of Venetian influence because the Venetians are trading with Constantinople, and everybody's benefiting. You've got a Venetian influence coming into Constantinople. You've got Constantinopolitan influence going out into Venice and Italy and this sort of thing. So there's this big interchange because we kind of forget how big of traders they were. My husband was just telling me the other day about the tin mines in Britain and how they've just uncovered, I don't know if they've just uncovered, but recently uncovered, like this evidence of trading, the Byzantines trading all the way up to England. So it's not like these people are like living in these little tiny villages kind of all isolated, they're quarantining, they're out there, they're on their ships and they're trading and they're always looking for new goods. Fun fact, the Byzantines are even influencing their political policies with access to Tyrian purple. Okay, textile nerds, unite. Is that not awesome? Okay, right. So you have this world that's very colorful and very influenced, and textiles are huge because they all have to be handmade. We don't have power looms. We don't have a spinning jenny yet. And so textiles are highly valued because they're incredibly labor intensive. So we kind of fast forward at the fall of Constantinople. A lot of people kind of have this vision in their minds that fall of Constantinople, everything just sort of shutter the doors, we're done. Well, no, that isn't exactly how it happened. What happens is in Constantinople, there was always this large artisan class, because to create this world in which you've got mosaics and metalwork and icons and textiles, well, you have to have a huge artisan class. And so these artisans basically go out in this great diaspora out after the fall of Constantinople, and they make their way into all of Europe, all over. They make their way into many of the courts of Europe. And so they take their artistic culture with them and their artistic upbringing and training with them. And this now influences the color and the arts of all the major courts in Europe. So this goes on even to the present day. I mean, we have, when we see things when we see a Venetian brocade or we see things like this, there's a very long chain of history behind that. And especially like in the way that it's colored. Now, to kind of take another little side route from here, that's kind of like the high textile art. This would be like the silk woven brocades and things like that. But this same world influenced the common people and the people who were living in villages and things like this, and women who are embroidering in their homes. And so this is why we see a lot of island work, Greek island work. If you think about it, all the Greek islands, they're also at this same time period, say 1400s through really up until the 20th century, they're also being influenced by traders and trading ships and various overlords at different times and being influenced by all of this. And so they're not as isolated as we think. And these women embroiderers who are in their homes, now not to say that there weren't professional workshops. People have asked me about that in the YouTube comments, and there definitely were professional workshops. One of the most famous was the workshop of Despionetta, and she oversaw a workshop and they created amazing epitaphios and highly embroidered items, usually for liturgical use. So there were professional workshops. But when we're talking about the average woman who's in her home on an island in Greece, she is basically the recipient of this incredible artistic heritage, really. And so she's using things like, she's using these reds, these blues, these golds that come out of ancient Rome. She's using things like greens, reds, blues, and golds in a very sort of bold, saturated colorway. This is the Star of Chios design. And this one, actually in the photo that I originally adapted for the design, the colors were very, very faded. It almost looked like it had been left out in the sun for a really, really long time. So I envisioned it with what the original colors would have been. And they're very bold. They're very bold, and they're very saturated. And so then we have things like these motifs coming out of Byzantium, but again, worked in this striking but simple colorway of black and red with light greens. And then this goes out into other parts of the world. And for example, this is a design that's coming up really soon. This is Ukrainian crisscross. And I wanted to do a straight up Ukrainian design, but see this adaptation. This is really fascinating. You have the red, but you have the black, but suddenly in Ukrainian embroidery, that sort of rusty red and black, that more sort of terracotta ancient Roman red gets swapped out for a really bright coral red. And that creates kind of a whole new like artistic tradition. This one actually is that's here, I'll show you that. And this one, even when I'm doing the pattern, I'm actually doing it in the classic red and black. And notice too, it's on white now. So a lot of Ukrainian embroidery, not all of it, but a lot of it's on that brighter white. So they're taking these colors and playing around with it. And when we release this design, it's also going to have a blue colorway where the red is swapped out for Wedgwood blue, which is, boy, when I sat down to play with it, it was super cool. I've never seen that like done. And it was definitely like a more modern take on it, but it looks awesome. I'm going to actually be using the sample to do the drawn thread hem video in a couple of weeks. So anyways, so we have also designs like this is definitely more of a Balkan design, and we can see how those colors have softened. We still have the black, but the red, the terracotta-y red is now switched to a coral, and now we've got these shades of these lighter blues, almost like China blues. And we've got those added in. So it's very interesting to kind of see how this tradition of color in Mediterranean textiles kind of moves throughout world history. As a designer, I find it really interesting because I'm very much of the artistic temperament that I like to have some confines to work within, because I feel like I do my best work when I kind of have to work, when I have some kind of self-imposed boundaries. When I only have a more limited color palette, it pushes me to kind of find all the depths, to kind of plumb the depths of that color palette. And I think that's really interesting. So I've played around with this. I don't like to make things totally modern, but I do like to kind of play around with things. So like when I did, I don't have that one out here. I'm trying to think of that one. But for example, when I did the Salerno tile, the little Salerno tile design, that one is done in the teal and the gold, but I swapped out the red for a copper color. And that like totally gave it this like almost 1960s mid-century modern feel. So it's just very interesting to see how these colors interact like throughout history. So, well, it's kind of a very brief overview. I mean, this topic we could talk about for days and weeks. But that's sort of a brief overview of sort of color in textiles throughout the Mediterranean world. And, you know, please forgive me, there's a lot of gaps. There's probably some things that I got incorrect. I am not a scholar. I just like to read a lot about this topic. And it's an amazing world. So if there are any oversights or things I missed or misstated, please forgive me, those oversights. And that's it. So I just want to encourage you to sort of look into this world of Mediterranean color. It's just a wonderful, wonderful world with such an amazing history. So I want to thank you for joining me today. To remind you, I'm Krista West. I'm the designer of Avlea Folk Embroidery, and you can follow me on Instagram at Krista M. West. That's Krista with a K. You can also sign up for my emails at www.avlea.life. Happy stitching!